Hi there. Welcome to week 4 of strategic management. We've definitely jumped into the business strategy game, and it should be interesting to see how we do in the first couple of rounds. I hope you're still totally immersed in the guide because that is definitely where you're going to get help on this. The other thing we did this week was develop company strategies. That I purposely do that at the beginning of the live business strategy game so that you have to think about the decisions that you're going to make in a more global manner in terms of how everything intersects, what your purposes are, what your objectives are, and then that should drive the more individualized decisions that you're going to make. The other thing that has great impact on that are your competitors. So the two things that will really drive your success is how well you're implementing your strategy and how well you're responding to competitors. So keeping that in mind, as you go forward, some of the ways we know our strategy is working is we see a rise in our financial strength and profitability, which, as you know, is one of the outcomes in the strategy game because the strategy game mirrors what is expected and happens in the real world. So another thing that we'll see is competitive strength. So in other words, you will begin to develop more market share in comparison to where you were against your competitors in the same spaces. So how do we know how well we're doing against our competitors? These are some of the things that you'll be looking at and that are important. So in the real world, but also they're reflected in the numbers within the game as well. So obviously sales and earnings growth, we don't want to be stagnant. We know in today's world, if we're stagnant or remaining the same and not changing, we're already behind everybody else. Clearly, stock price is important in that it's a reflection of how the rest of the world perceives the health and vitality of our company. We do want that to reflect real financial strength, though. So this is why some of the financial indicators are part of the scoring for the game, because this is the way it is, again, in the real world. Customer retention rate is really important because even if you're advertising and gaining new customers, if you're losing customers, you're spending a lot of money to not gain very much traction. So how does that happen? You know, what are the ingredients there? Could that be response to the customers? Could that be quality? Could that, there are ways to demonstrate how valued your customers are. And then, as I mentioned, obviously acquiring new customers is really important. In your branding, your image and your reputation is huge. And in marketing class, hopefully you learned that a large brand or a powerful brand can really translate into a large market share and strength in the market. So think about some of the brands right now that you think of as strong brands, and particularly those that have a very positive image in some way, whether that image in that brand is based on innovation or quality, dependability, reliability, cool techniques and technology, or simply ways to help solve our problems in our day-to-day world. So the other thing we want to look at is what's happening with inside our company that allows us to create good products at good prices and make everything work so that our external strategy is working well. So these are all the things that are going to roll into those decisions that you're making. But there are also other things that happen in the real workplace. So let's take a look at the strategy game just briefly. There are two really important things that you're striving for. One is best in industry, and you can see here, and hopefully you're well aware of this, these are the criteria, the scoring items that will be used in determining who is best in industry. You actually get bonus points for being ahead of your competition in these areas. So the other one is investor expectations. So the best in industry reflects how we're doing against our competitors, right? The investor expectations are similar to that, but also our investors want to know that we are a financially sound and viable company and that we're paying attention to that. We're not just making short-term decisions that could tank us in the long term. So those criteria, some of them overlap, right? You can see that, but they're slightly different. So these are the areas that are critical, okay? So we think about, I'm talking a lot about competition today, and so here are some thoughts about what it means to be a highly competitive and successfully competitive company in the workplace and in the marketplace. So market share does matter. I say this a lot in marketing class, that market share begets market share begets market share. The more you have, the more you get. The less you have, the harder it is to grow that market share. And why is that? Well, if you have a large market share, that means you have a lot of customers. And if they are happy or pleased, then they'll stay with you. The other thing is, if you have a large market share, then that means you have brand familiarity. And if I'm going out to buy something, whether it's a car, computer, or whatever, and I don't have a lot of knowledge in that area, I'm probably going to go to a company that dominates the market share, because my thinking is herd mentality, right? If so many people are buying this product, it can't be all bad, right? And so that really helps your sales. The other thing is, then there's demand for your product. And so stores want to carry your product. They'll give you better shelf space. They won't charge you as much for your shelf space. If you're not known yet, or your product is new and not known, it's really hard to convince particularly retail outlets to give you really coveted, valuable, and limited shelf space. Okay, so that's enough probably on market share. You talk a lot about vision and mission in many of your classes, but again, we started out in our strategy paper starting with this, because this is who we are and what we stand for should guide all of our decisions, okay? So this is interesting. You've heard the expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, not exactly, because again, if you leave everything the way it is, then you're at a standstill and other companies are moving past you. And so in the practice rounds, so I did manage a company. It was in industry 2. So if you're in one of the other industries, you didn't see it. If you're in industry 2, I was company H. The first round, I did all kinds of wild things to try them out, which I kind of asked you guys to do so you could get an idea. And I came in last place, no surprise. And then the second practice round, I did absolutely nothing. I still came in last place. Why? Because you guys were starting to make adjustments, right? So you were beginning to make some changes, and I was at a standstill. So don't think that just doing nothing is a really good strategy. And that leads into the next point, which is we're continually adapting and innovating and improving. You hear a lot about quality improvement and process. Obviously, at Oregon Tech, we're about innovation. So these are words that should permeate pretty much all of your classes. Acquisition is essential to growth. You have to acquire customers and resources, etc. So, and that leads into the people in your organization. People are important. People are making your product. So how do you treat those people? And how well does that translate into the bottom line, or your objectives, or your goals, or your vision and mission? And the last one is try to stay cost competitive in this global market. So even if you're not, let's say you're a high-end, a niche market player. So if we go back to our car analogy, maybe you're Ferrari or Porsche, and you're still competing in that market space with other high-end automobile manufacturers. So if you can create the same or better quality, but do it at a lower cost, then you have a significant advantage over them. You will make more money. Now, ways that we can do this is through quality improvement, process improvement, knowledge for our employees, training, etc., incentives, all kinds of things that can help us reduce that cost, and then also resources, or maybe transportation, or et cetera, advertising. So take a look. Those things are all of these are reflected in the game and in the real world. So, all right. Now, I have said to some of you, and I think I did in the one meet and greet meeting we had maybe, which is at the end of each round, the first report I go to, my go-to report, is the competitor analysis report. That will give you a snapshot view of where your competitors are. You know, you can tell from that. The grids are based on price and quality, and you can tell where they're spending their resources. So is their strategy a low price, high price, quality, low quality, et cetera, et cetera? And then the size of those bubbles tells you how large their market share is. So if they're butting up against your bubble, then that means they are a direct competitor. If they're in a completely different quadrant, they're not a direct competitor, but they can still take business away from you. So when you're looking at this report, or even at the numbers, or out in the world, questions to ask. I highlighted my favorites. So if you're looking at your competitors, what are their strengths and weaknesses? And then, you know, like, how can we capitalize on that, right? What are their objectives and strategies? And I talked a little bit about that by using that competitive intelligence report. How are our products or services positioned then against them? Again, look at where those bubbles are placed, and are they butting up against each other? Oops. It doesn't mean you can't overcome that. It just means that you have to pay attention to it. And you have to be intentional about your decisions and your strategy. And then, so what's working and what's not working? What factors? What are the things, the decisions that you made that resulted in your current position in the industry? That really is kind of the bottom line. We have to know what things helped us and what things hurt us. So you can see there are a whole bunch of these questions, and they're really good and viable questions. So feel free to take a screenshot if it's something you might be interested in and want to think about a little bit more, put in front of you while you're making your decisions. All right, so there really is a thing called competitive intelligence out in the world. It's not just in the business strategy game. So competitive intelligence is something that most large companies do, medium-sized companies. They're trying to gather information on their competitors. They trying to understand what they're doing and then how that affects their company, but also then looking at how the competition is reacting to trends in the marketplace, right? Companies gather data on other companies. And now you all know, or most of you may know, I'm also the ethics teacher, so we definitely want to do this in an ethical manner. So we're not doing dirty tricks, but a lot of large firms hire senior executives from rival companies so that they have some insight, right? You've heard a lot in the early years of the technology boom, we saw a lot of reverse engineering that happened. But also you can survey and interview customers, just people on the street. What is your favorite brand? Why? You know, or in the stores, why are you purchasing this, not that? There's a lot of places that you can go and get information. And if it's a publicly traded company, then they're required to file financials, right? So you can at least get that information. And if you are at all astute in finance, you can, to me, looking at a company's financials is like a good detective novel. You know, you have what's in front of you, but there are clues in there that tell you what's going on behind the scenes. It can be really interesting. So competitive intelligence is alive and well. And here's a little story. In the gas and oil industry, some of the companies actually do aerial surveillance and ground surveillance to see where their competitors are moving equipment to, so they can see if they're looking to ramp up in production or maybe start developing a new site or whatever, so that people on the ground who are actually checking this all out. So there's a variety of ways to do it. And now with online and social media, we can really accomplish a lot. All right, the textbook is going to introduce you to what we call value chain analysis. And this is pretty important in the world of business and organizations. So this is where you look at the entire process of raw material to final product, and what are activities occur along that process, and what are the costs associated with each one of those, and do each one of those activities actually add value. So you can see here that the goal is to identify, you know, where things are going well and not well along that chain, and to address those. So that's and this is something that our operations management people will be very familiar with. Here's just a graph or a picture or depiction of what we're talking about. So this is the process that you would go through in looking at those and determining how you can enhance your value chain, and then also maybe looking at what your competitors are doing if you can, and trying to develop a more sustainable competitive advantage. Many of you are familiar with SWOT analysis, which is another strategic tool. And this is a process where we look at our company and we do it in terms of two main areas: what's happening inside our company and what's happening out there in the environment that affects our company and our marketplace. So internally, we look at what do we do well and what do we not do well. And so what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses? And that helps us know, for instance, if our strategy is to do XYZ, but that's one of our weak areas, we don't have people who are well-schooled or competent in those areas, that's a huge problem for us, right? And then remember, these are all internal. These are things that we have control over. We can improve our strengths and weaknesses, and we can eliminate our weaknesses. So external, these are things that happen that are out of our control. So opportunities that exist in the external environment that we could take advantage of, but we don't create those. So for instance, and same thing with threats. It's something in the external environment that we have no control over, but we can use our strengths and weaknesses to fend them off or take advantage of opportunities. So this is how these are all related. So an example of an opportunity would be a gap in a product group that's offered out there. So maybe in terms of a specific product, the ones that are out there are not meeting the needs of a certain group of people. And that is a gap in the offering. So that's an opportunity. So if you have an underserved group of customers that their needs are not being met, that's an opportunity to get in there and take care of that. Threats are often surround us are things like our competition. They're always threatening to us, right? But the other thing are things like COVID-19, natural disasters, rules and regulations. What's Congress passing? What's the president doing? How does that change things within our industry, and how does it affect our individual company? So threats are these outside things that are happening that we can't control, but we can control how we respond. So other opportunities might also be, often your opportunities and threats are the same thing. So think about natural disaster. if there's a hurricane in Florida, that is a threat to many of their local businesses and retail establishments. It is a huge opportunity for companies like Home Depot. Okay, they do very well during those types of natural disasters and afterwards. So often they can be the same thing. So here are some lists. For those of you who are really interested in this, I listed some items that you might look at in terms of each one of these categories, right? And how you would go about doing that. So another thing you can do, and this you can do in the business strategy game, is do a SWOT analysis on your competitors. In particular, your main competitor. So again, if we go back to our competitive intelligence report and we see we're butting up against another company, or there's a company making a move on us, which is not a good thing, we're kind of scared by that, then we might want to do a SWOT on them, look at their strengths, weaknesses, and know what they can and can't do, but then also look at what opportunities are they seeing that we're not, and what is the threat? How are they threatening us, right? Okay. Once we've done our SWOT matrix and exercise, then we can begin to match those things. And this is where we take our strengths and weaknesses and we begin to match them up with the external things, the opportunities and threats. And that helps inform our continual strategy and our objectives. Here are some more. These are other ways. It's a this matches this matches that, or you could look at this, you could look at that. So give you an idea here. The other thing we do in terms of trying to figure out how well our strategy is working is through benchmarking. And I'm thinking you've probably come across this term in business and organizations before. But this is very specific. It's an analytical tool that we use to line up our company against our competitors and our sister companies in an industry to see how we stack up. So if we're in, so for instance, Oregon Tech, we look at all of the attributes of Oregon Tech. We look at the things that we have, that we don't have, our costs, our tuition, our locations, anything the marketplace might want. And then we list all those criteria and we rate ourselves and then we rate our competitors. And that we can do that analytically and with scoring, and we can come up with an actual determination of where we are. It also helps us identify best practices of either ourselves or competitors who are doing the best in the marketplace. Why are they better than we are, right?